it's easy. Now, how to measure it? This is how it comes. This is how the interest rate, as I told you, when we measure any risk, we want to know what is it and how does it come, like what we show you. We have the investment risk and the financing risk. But then to measure it, we have two models. One model, and this is what we're actually going to do for the rest of those slides. One called the pricing model, and the other one called the duration model. We will start with the pricing model. So the pricing model, the problem with the repricing model, it measures only the impact on net interest income. It takes care of that one. So when the level of interest rate raises or falls over a particular period of time, net interest income can change, and the repricing model can measure how much that. So let's look at the repricing model. So the repricing model, we have to introduce ourselves to one issue called risk-sensitive asset and another issue called risk-sensitive liabilities. And we get what we call the dollar gap. When we get the dollar gap, we multiply that dollar gap times the change with the interest change in the interest rate. Then this is what we will get the change in the net interest income. So if you calculate this right, you don't have to worry about this. Just take the gap, interest rate increases, make it plus, interest rate decreases, make it plus. So a drop in the interest rate, which you will make of 1%, you will make -1. An increase in the interest rate with 1%, you will make this +1. It's either plus or minus. You will see what you can, and then plus or minus, as I told you, and then the gap is here. So the issue is calculating the gap. The problem now is what is risk-sensitive asset and what risk-sensitive liabilities. So to define the model, which is this model, to define it, we are saying risk-sensitive asset, RSA is risk-sensitive assets, RSL is risk-sensitive liabilities, and this is the dollar gap, and this is the definition of the model. Now let's see what is the examples of risk-sensitive rate-sensitive assets. When we have short-term loans, when we have T-notes, this is, look, anything that change that has a floating rate, which means changes over the year or have a floating rate, all of those products, short-term loans, T-notes, floating rates, all of those actually floating rate loans we have, all of those is rate sensitive, which means when the interest goes up or down, they will change. So let's take it a rule of thumb. When we have short-term loans, anything short-term, usually it is rate sensitive. And sometimes, unless I tell you it's fixed. So the question is, will or can this asset have its interest rate change within a specific time? If the answer is yes, it's rate sensitive. If it is no, not rate sensitive. Fine. What if I have, later on, I will show you, if I have a loan that will end in 2 years and it is fixed, and I'm trying to calculate those 2 years risk-sensitive dollar gap. Now, if I put this in a pocket or in horizon, when it matures, then it becomes risk-sensitive asset or liability, because when it matures means ends. When it ends, we will have a new one, and we will have a new one with a new rate. So the question here, something to add, if the asset is maturing to be repaid, then it's considered risk-sensitive asset since it will be reinvested in the new interest rates and therefore becomes part of the risk-sensitive asset packets. Let's see this one. So this is just another, what is example of risk-sensitive liabilities, term deposits, bank acceptance, negotiable certificate of deposits. All of this, as you can see, money market products, and they are less than 1 year. And they are, term deposit can take more than 1 year because term deposit actually are rate sensitive. They have floating rates. And then we have the banker acceptance. This is less than 1 year, short term. And this is short term, and all of those money market. Now, the question to ask is, will or can this liability have its interest change? Same thing. I told you if it is yes, rate sensitive, no, not rate sensitive. So note, if the liability is maturing, then in this case, it will be within the rate sensitive because you have to refinance it. Let me show you this. Okay, so now we want to measure the changes in the net interest income using the repricing model. Now, you have to classify the risk sensitive asset because this is what's happening. If you go to the bank, this, I mean, to calculate the interest rate risk in a bank, and they give you all the loans, maybe you need 6 months as a team to take each loan, especially if you have so many loans. I mean, it depends. If the data is there, okay, but if you are starting from scratch, of course, you have to take care of that. And then this database of risk sensitive asset and risk sensitive liabilities, the bank keep updating. So you know the numbers. And if you have a feeling that the interest rate will change in the market because of the overnight rate is changing, for example, the government is trying to decrease or increase the rates, then in this case, you will have to look at those issues and calculate the interest rate risk in case there will be a change. Now, what they do in the banks, and this is what the US do, the US Federal Reserve requires US commercial banks to report repricing gaps. Same in Australia. And they think same in this country. But I know in Australia, they report it, and they will show you now. Here, because the regulation, keep going, and I mean, the central bank keep asking so many different reports, especially for credit risk and all these issues. But the interest rate risk is one of the requirements. So in the US, for example, they ask commercial banks to report repricing gaps for assets and liabilities. How did they do it? They told you divide your assets and liabilities to buckets, two classes. Something that mature in 1 day, from 1 day to 3 months, from 3 months to 6 months. So you will take all those loans that mature in 1 month, put it. That will mature now has nothing with sensitivity, whether it is short term or long term. Just take now the maturity horizons. They take the maturity horizons because when the assets or liabilities mature, in this case, you have to renew it. For example, if you take the liabilities and the asset that matures in 1 day to 3 months, so if they are equal and zero, there is no risk. But if the liabilities higher than the assets and the interest rate is increases, then there is a gap and there is losses. I will show you here. So we have 1 to 3 months, 3 months to 6 months, 6 months to 12 months, 1 year to 5 years, and 5 years. Look how the table looks. This is, I just reflected the table. So this is the risk sensitive assets. Actually, this is the horizon and risk sensitive liabilities. This is the assets and the liabilities. And we get here, the difference between this and this is 25. Just this minus this. This is 10 minus 40 equals 30. And then we continue like this. As you can see, if you add them up, this is it's zero. Just by accident, it's zero, okay? Now, if the average interest rate rises by 1% over the next 3 months, which is, I'm talking about this one. In this one, what would happen to me in this horizon is my assets actually is less than my liabilities. This will mature in 3 months, this will mature in 3 months, which means now I have to look, this risk sensitive liabilities, 40 million or 40,000 or whatever will go out of my assets, of my liabilities, which means now I have minus 30, which means I have to, now the liabilities is higher than my assets, And I will be subject to what? To what we call refinancing risk, because 40 will leave my liabilities. Maybe their loans in other buckets, whatever, but 40 will leave. Only 10 will leave here, which means here I will be paid for 10, and I will be receiving 10 and paying 40. Now I have to borrow the difference 30. If the interest rate is going up, it's not a good case, because I have to borrow 30 now with the new rate. And this is what's happening. If you look at this horizon, this is coming from what? From what we call refinancing risk. For you just according to the pricing model, you just calculate it. So if the average interest rate rises by 1% over the next 3 months, then the changes in 1 day to 3 months is minus 30 times 0.1, 300,000. This is all. This is the change in the net interest income. Now, we have something else called, this is case 1, which is maturity buckets. Case 2, which is the cumulative gap. Now, the cumulative gap is different, because you have to calculate, you have to get the gap, and then you have to get the cumulative of the gaps. So here, for example, 25, then this is the same numbers I get from the last slide. This is 30, so you have to decrease this from this. Now you are accumulating of 1 day to 3 months is actually minus 5. Cumulative 3 to 6 months, from 1 day to 6 months, is actually minus 5, minus 30, minus 35. From up to 1 year, you will find it minus 65, because you will add all of those, okay? And then so you can add this 65 minus 60, so minus 5. Anyways, now if the interest rate increases by 1 and you want to get the pricing within 1 year, look, within 1 year, which is all of those up to here, which is the gap of minus 65. Now the risk of the cumulative gaps, the risk of the cumulative of 1 year, I can ask you for 3 months, for 6 months. So it's actually minus 65 times 1 minus 0. This is the increase. It's 650,000 for 1 year. If you are talking about cumulative. I told you before that they have what we call the Westpac and all those banks. For example, this is Westpac, one of the big 4 in Australia. And what they do, they report. And this is actually one of their calculation from 94 to the year 2008. And you can see they calculate the assets, liabilities, and actually the 1 year gap. And then this is, you don't have to worry about this column. They calculate the gap over the total assets, which is, you can do it. Banks use this as type of indicators, but actually we are only interested to get to this area. This area. Okay. It looks like we are done with the repricing model. So what do we do with the pricing model? Is it good? Yes. It provides information. It's simple. It's very simple. As compared to the duration model, which I explained it in a little time. Now, the weaknesses of this is its market value effect. It doesn't take into consideration the cash flow. And it makes what we call over aggregation. And also it misses some things, run-ups. And for sure, it ignores the off-balance sheet effect, which I already explained it before. Let me go over this one by one. What do we mean by market value? Interest rate changes can adversely affect the market value of assets and liabilities. And thus the net worth, which means Now, when we look at the repricing model, we are only concerned with the financial statement. Do we talk about the impact on capital, which I talked about it here? No, I'm not talking about this area. This area is completely ignored. I'm only talking about the net interest income. This is what the pricing model. This is one, it's difficulty. So they don't talk about the impact on the net worth. They only talk about the impact of the net interest income. And this is actually one of the problems. Now, what is the other thing? So it's partially measures of interest income. So as such, the repricing model is only a partial measure of interest rate risk, which is takes care only of net interest income, or the changes in net interest income. Okay. The second thing is they say over aggregation. Look, when you look at the packets, for example, this packet is from week 1, from month 1 to 6. Actually, we assume we are saying, oh, all of those, for example, you are calculating in the bank, the ones within this bucket is actually 0 according to this, because you have in week 1 there is no, week 2 there is nothing, there is no gaps. Here look like there are 0 gaps. Here there is one gap, which means plus 50. Year month 4 there is another gap, is 50. But then month 5 is minus 50. 6 months is minus 50. If you look at them, it looks like this one actually 0 gap. While actually inside, because you have 2 months of minus 50 and 2 months of over 50, we are coming back to risk-sensitive asset minus risk-sensitive liability of 6 months. Gap is 0. While actually during the months, if there is a changes, because of this horizon gaps, maturity horizons, it doesn't take into considerations what's happening in the months. This is what we call over aggregation, which means they don't look, I am here, have a positive gap, have a positive gap, negative gap, negative gap. If you add them all up, I am 0 gap, which is actually does not reflect the facts. Now the runoffs. The runoffs means, which is problem number 3, when we have payments from the during the time, we don't take care of that. That can't be, because when there is a payment of a loan that is for 3 years, I have a loan of 3 years. Now this loan for 3 years, when I go according to the repricing model, it is, I will put it under 3 years. But actually this loan is a car loan, for example, which means there is payment every month. No, I said, okay, I will take the loan for 3 years and I put it under the 3 years horizon. While actually there is payments is coming during the 3 years, maybe in annual basis, semi-annual basis, monthly basis. So actually it's not considering that cash flow. That cash flow is taken and also invested again. And we didn't see it because, and this is what we called, there is the runoffs. So this is also the one we take it and invest it again, is it could be rate sensitive. So this runoff component is a rate sensitive, which means that the periodic cash flows of interest and principal amortization payments on long-term assets that can be reinvested at market rates. This, they don't take it to consideration. They just take the loan. It's 20 years or it's 5 years or it's 3 years. What even happening inside, it doesn't take care of that. The third thing, which is the off-balance sheet effect, which is the repricing model generally include only the assets and liabilities listed in the balance sheet. Changes in the interest rate will also affect cash flows of so many off-balance sheet issues. As I told you before, it can change all those derivative contracts, they don't take care of it. And then such cash flows from off-balance sheet activities are ignored by the simple pricing model. So as you can see, all of those problems with the repricing model, and it's a little bit not strong, but very simple. Okay, we go now to the duration. Now duration is a little bit our friend. So the duration takes care of that. So the weighted average of time to maturity of series of cash flows, this is what duration is, using the relative present value of the cash flow as weights. Now you will say, I didn't really get it. I say yes, from this wording, you can or you cannot get it, but they are talking about the cash flows, which is one of the problem of the repricing model. They have to take care of that. And I will show you the calculation now. So at the duration takes to considerations, the assets or liability maturity, as well as the timing of the cash flow. So this, because now I need to put the asset and liability in different maturities. If it is a loan of 3 years, I will put it a loan of 3 years. But actually, if there is a cash flow coming, it's not 3 years. It will be less than 3 years. So it will take the maturity of 3 years, but the model was constructed in a way that it will take a cash flow and decrease the timing. Also, the loan shows 3 years, but when you see the maturity, the duration model will take it less than 3 years if there is cash coming through the time. So this is the formula actually. Don't worry about this formula. This is just the numerator is the total time weighted present values, and the denominator is the total present values. Let me show you this example. If I have a loan of 30,000, this is the loan, my friends. This is very important to understand the duration model. It's very important. So this is the loan of 3 years of 3,000, and it's for 3 years. So according to the repricing model, I will put this loan as an asset under the 3 years horizon. Under the duration model, they say no. You have to take the payments, which is year 1, year 2, year 3, discount it. This is the discount factor of year 1, year 2, year 3. And this is the cash flow minus the discounting factor, which make it 925 for year 1. This is the present value of the first payment, present value of the second payment, the present value of the third payment. Add them up. This is the assumption of all present values of T, which is this one. Then I have to multiply this by the timing, which is time 1. Here will be times 1. Here will be times 2, and then bring it to here. So 9,2, this is times 2, 70,000. This is times 3, which is 23,000. So you will make here times 2. For example, if you want to know, this is but just times 2 times 3, and you add them up and you divide this by this. So you divided the assumption of those cash flows times the discount factor times T, divided by the cash flow times divided by the discount factor. Now somebody will say, sir, do you have a proof? Do you have the proof for this formula? No, I don't have it, and you don't have to worry about it. It's just, it was developed like this, so it takes to consideration the cash flow. Now this loan, who it was 3 years down, how much is it according to the calculation? 1.95 years. Which means now, if you were putting it before, according to the pricing model, to 3 years, now this is just to calculate what we call the horizon. So this loan will be within from the year 1 to year 2, for example, or in the 2 years horizon, not in the 3 years. Now this is the explanation of the model. If you come here, you will find the duration model to finish it, because the duration model at the end, I want to calculate the change in the equity. So I have to take this formula to get the duration of the assets. And now I calculated the duration of the assets, right? I will do all the durations of the assets. And I will have to do the same thing for the duration of the liabilities. I have the duration of the assets and the liabilities. I can now use this formula. So this is the, to calculate the durations of the assets and liabilities. This is step one. Step two, I have to calculate, if I have the assets and liabilities, I can calculate now the change in equity, which is the impact on the balance sheet. So the change in asset, I can calculate the change in equity assets and the change in liabilities if I like. But if you look at this example, if we have a duration of asset of 5 years, calculated through this table and this formula I showed you before, and duration of liabilities of 3 years, now I can calculate actually the change and the interest rate increased, change by 1%, increases. Then I can calculate this formula, which I showed you before. The change in equity is duration of asset minus K, which is K is the leverage, which means how much is the assets to the liabilities. So here, for example, I have the assets 100, the liability 90, which means the leverage is 90 over 100, okay? Which means liability over assets. So as you can see here now, duration of assets minus the leverage times the duration of liability times the total assets times the change of the interest rate over 1 plus the interest rate. If I take these numbers, the balance sheet, so the duration of asset is 5 coming from here, minus the leverage, which is 90 over 100, 90, times 3, which is the duration of the liabilities, times 100, which is the total assets, times the change in interest over 1 of the change of interest, 1.1. So the drop is actually 2.9. The drop is 2.9 in my assets, in my equities. This is the drop of the my equities. So this equity now is not 10, but actually 10 minus of this one. If I can write it here. Now it's the drop in my equity. Now, if I told you what is my equity, you will say my equity is actually, it's actually 10 minus 2.09. Which is actually 791 or whatever, instead of 10. So the increase in the interest rate, which is logic, the increase in the interest rate has actually decreased equity because there is the duration of the assets is higher than the duration of the liabilities. Look, the duration of the assets is higher than the duration of liabilities. So the impact on the balance sheet, there will be a decrease in the assets, decrease in liabilities, but actually the impact is so the impact will be minus on the equities. We will talk about this in the workshop. We will talk about this also. I didn't have problem in the tutorial about the durations, nothing about durations. I save it for the workshop. Thank you very much. Let me stop now this one. I wish you a good day. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next, we'll talk to you in the next recording. Bye-bye.